always remember the first words I heard him speak. He said, human beings fight not because they are different, but because they are the same.
In a way, it's a question of conflict. Why is conflict so important in human life? Is the fact that people desire the same thing an accident? Or is there something in mankind which forces men who are close to each other to desire the same thing?
Born in Avignon on Christmas Day 1923, Rene Girard is the author of works that have been published in more than 24 languages.
Mensonge romantique and vérité romanesque.
Violence, the sacred.
The Scapegoat.
Things hidden since the foundation of the world.
It's of such extraordinary importance that I've compared him to the fathers of the church.
He wanted to enlist the anthropologists and the sociologists. He wanted to say, I can explain to you where we're going wrong.
There is a tendency in human beings to desire what their neighbors desire.
I mean, I realize, my goodness, he's decoded desire. He's decoded human relations.
You know, there's one thread you can follow to try to make sense of our world.
It connected with everything, beginning with the passage from animal to man.
Rene's ideas are like a bomb, but it's a bomb that doesn't explode outward, it explodes inward in us.
If you can do an anatomy of the madness of reciprocal violence, then perhaps you can wake people up to the fact that they are trapped within these infernal cycles.
This has been hidden since the foundation of the world. But once it's announced to you, you cannot not see it. It's everywhere.
Let me start with a question.
Okay.
So after describing kind of Girard's understanding of where religion or cultures develop from, and he's using those two terms like interchangeably, that culture in the beginning is simply religion, because there's no culture without religion. What is religion? It's just what the group is doing. It's symbolic worldview, and so that ultimately is just to facilitate, in Girard's view, sacrifice, because sacrifice is the central activity of the group that needs to be done again and again and again. And all of cultural institutions flow from the scapegoat mechanism in the way that the scapegoat mechanism is a prerequisite for peace in the society. It's a peace founded on the dead, then deified victim, but it's a real peace that allows culture to then start. But at the center of it is violence. Violence that is then encapsulated into the symbolic realm through myth, through taboo, and ritual.
Yeah. So religion becomes the safety valve where you let off steam, because you can create a sacrifice, and the sacrifice relieves the culture or society or the group from the anxiety and the tension that they're feeling that is directed toward each other. That's the victim mechanism, correct?
Yeah, like normally we think of religion in terms of like doctrinal, like if you think of like all the other theories of like the origin of religion, why do we even have it? You'll usually hear people talk about like, well, we evolved because religion evolved because we have this hyper agency that when we're in the savannah and we hear something rustling in the bushes, we have to ascribe some agency to it in order for us to then evolve to be protective from actual predators. So by ascribing an agency that isn't there is therefore God. And so you have the idea of God blossoming from basically a fear of death and also this hyperactive agency that we develop. But at the same time, whereas that is probably true in a psychological way, that we do have this, we are positing and projecting into this symbolic realm, it doesn't, why Girard's theory is better than most theories of the origins of religion is that it solves for it. One, it takes violence seriously, whereas other theories kind of just take it for granted that we can get along with each other. And then two, like so many other things in culture are explained by mimetic theory versus, say, positing agency to things. So, for instance, if you look at kind of like strange, well, not strange, but if primitive beliefs about what is acceptable and not acceptable, taboo and prohibition, basically, what is not acceptable, it's often things that can lead to violence. So it's that twins are seen as a superstitious or an omen of violence, and so are a taboo in society, or even the incest prohibition across all civilizations is a way of mitigating violence due to desire. So Girard is really pointing out that the primitive societies understand, in a way that we don't as moderns, how susceptible we are to the escalation of violence. That violence for primitive societies is much more of a threat than it is now, because we have the state, or we live in a Christian paradigm, a moral paradigm. So things are radically different as moderns today than they were when violence could be easily could easily grow. And Girard basically, and that's something we have to just keep in the front of our mind when thinking about Girard. He's really talking about the differences of primitive societies and how best to interpret them. And so when we use Girard as a kind of a contemporary cultural critique, there's always a way in which this isn't particularly what Girard is talking about in terms of the scapegoat mechanism, because we're in a different paradigm. And Girard explains that by giving what is the difference, he thinks, of what our paradigm is, the Judeo-Christian paradigm, and the archaic or the primitive.
Okay, so explain that a little bit more, because this is really where the switch takes place from the Greek mythology that you explained a minute ago to what happens in the Judeo-Christian paradigm.
Yeah. So if you look at primitive religions, the deities, or all the different kind of forms of the deity, the semi-gods, the demigods, the sacred ancestors, the kings, there's always an ambiguous moral dimension to them. They're not totally good, and often they do very bad things. And so why are they considered deities? At least to our modern minds, or at least the Judeo-Christian paradigm, like there's a way in which we don't want to assent to these awful gods. And even in primitive times, there was already a critique of whether or not we should be listening, in Plato, for instance, whether or not we should be telling these stories, because they might lead to us imitating the gods. So Girard explains this dual nature of that the god both brings the chaos and the order, is both the bad and the good, because of the fact of this deified victim also brought the bad and the good, namely the violence, the mimetic violence, and the solution to that violence. So if you think about it in like that is an aspect of primitive religion and gods of the pagan religions.
Is there any truth to the idea that, when you have a patriarchal society created, to, bring justice to, those who are violent, that it gives us a free pass to not examine our own violence? That's something that's always bothered me in my life too, is that we while on the one hand you have cable shows that are dedicated to serial killers, there's never an example of like, well, let's look, and when these guys, go on mad tirades and kill a whole bunch of people, it's never what is motivating, and can we examine and accept in ourselves that, yeah, that person is very similar to me. I'm capable of that too, but we push it off and say, oh no, it's them. I'm not, there's a lack of self-examination and in terms of good and evil, the evil parts of us really, that we don't really want to mind the depths and acknowledge. And is that part of Girard's theory is like, it's okay, and in this leap that you're talking about with Christianity.
Well, I think that and you respond too, Sam, but I think that the prohibitions toward violence happen because you have a judicial system in place, and Girard talks about that. You have that in place, and that is supposed to be an outside regulatory way in which you deal with violence by taking it and removing it from the culture. And that seems to be a way in which we deal with it. In terms of self-reflection, he's always asking us to be more reflective. And he's asking us to examine our mimetic way of our own desire. He points out the last portion of the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, written right into the law, is "you shall not covet." In the French, it's "you shall not desire." What you shouldn't desire is your neighbor's donkey or your neighbor's whatever it is, your neighbor's wife, or it goes down the line ad infinitum. And that's because even though it's the last of the issue in the Decalogue, in the Ten Commandments, it is probably as important as anything else because the desire aspect is always with us, and we have to curb our appetites and to notice that we are doing things that actually can force problems not only upon our neighbor in the desiring of what our neighbor has and wanting it for ourselves, but also on ourselves in the very object of our desire. Is that an appropriate response to that from your perspective, Sam?
So I would say, there are a couple things going on. It's a really good question. I don't want to get too diverted because maybe we can get back to that question, right. Especially if it's something that weighs on you. I think that a lot can be said in this direction. But I did want to get to what Girard then find what the difference is in the Judeo-Christian story.
Right.
And so Girard at this time, he's writing in the late 60s, and so imagine all the tumultuous events happening, Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement. There's real violence happening outside of his typing room his office in Buffalo, and then in Johns Hopkins. So he's really concerned with the political and social situation, but he's getting at it through literature and anthropology and the study of religion, because he thinks it gets to the heart of it. And so in some ways, this also was the heart of it for me as I was questioning my own Christian faith in college. One of the kind of nails on the coffin of Christianity, why I could dispense with it, was the question of other religions. If, because if all other religions say that they are the truth, then how can you say that Christianity is the truth? If all the primitive religions especially have the same structure, there's this dying and rising God figure who is killed and rises and performs miracles. How does that make Jesus any special? Especially because he comes later. Christianity just seems like a parrot, or that is just copying other religions and calling it unique, calling itself the one true faith, when in fact it's the same as all the others. So that was a real, I thought that was probably the most, the best critique of Christianity that I couldn't contend with, frankly. And so I just kind of accepted, oh, this is all bullcrap, that this is just a story and that there is no claim to truth. Christianity it is like all the other religions, and therefore it's not true. And I even think that as I was trying to solve that question and looking at the Christian answers, that until Girard, there weren't any good ones. So it never made sense to me that there are Christians at all in the modern world if they can't answer this basic question, how is Christianity unique? Like, there's no way around it. So Girard, in a sense, is kind of single-handedly, in my mind, makes Christianity relevant again, because he answers this question that Christians haven't answered. But I think it's because it's only in this modern context that it can be answered. Namely, that the modern project of trying to debunk Christianity by showing its similarities to other religion actually gives Girard the pattern in which to interpret it. So the anthropologists who go out to show Christianity is not unique end up arming Girard with this weapon.
And your experience with having discovered Girard 10 years after you graduated seminary or whatever, maybe you can answer to that, like your vision of Christianity.
What I can say is, and I think that you need to unpack this a little bit more for us, but I will just say this. From the time I was little, I understood that competition was really important. And so when Henry Nouwen stood in front of our class on the first day,
was at Yale,
and he was at Yale, that's at Yale Divinity School, and I was in his class, and I was feeling, I had gone through, I've been a rural pastor in northern Vermont for years, and it was a place where there are people who had issues with how to put food on the table and how to just get through poverty and a lot of those types of things. And this is back in the mid-70s. And it was a really beautiful experience for me because there was so much cooperation and so much care in the community. And I went to a hyper-competitive institution, Yale, and everybody was speaking a different language, but it wasn't a language of practicality. It wasn't a language of common sense. It wasn't a language of how you take care of your neighbor or help your neighbor. It wasn't how do you do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. It wasn't doing that type of stuff. It was going in and learning terminologies and learning doctrines and learning things that, for me, had very, very little relevance at that particular moment. And I felt like a fish out of water. So when I walk into Henry Nouwen's class, someone said, you're miserable, and I was. I had a new baby, and we're trying to adjust to city life after being in rural Vermont. And he said, you're miserable. Why don't you go to, take a class with Henry Nouwen? I think your life will be changed. It was changed. It was definitely changed. And he starts off the class with that quote from the apostle Paul, and it's to the Philippians, and it's chapter 2. And he goes and he starts off in the preface to it. It says, you shall have no competition among you, but each must consider the other better than himself. For Christ took the form of a servant. He humbled himself even more, even to death on a cross. Therefore he's highly exalted, that every knee should bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Well, I sat there and I was stupefied. I almost fell off of my chair, I think. I was just so totally changed by hearing that. That's the way he started his whole class on compassion, by citing that particular verse, because everything that I understood and knew up until that point was all about, on a certain level, competition. And here he is totally reversing that, turning it upside down, and then saying Jesus was the one who points out how this humbling aspect is, how important it is, and it's only by humbling yourself more and more and more and by being less and less competitive that he shows the way, and that is highly exalted. And that's the way out of our violence. That was the key to unlocking the door. But I didn't know where the violence came from. I didn't have a mechanism to understand why we were violent and so competitive and so on. And Rene Girard takes me from that point of saying, yes, that's why I follow Jesus, as difficult as that may be, or try to follow him. And I needed to find the backstory of why we got to a point where we're so violent. And I didn't have a way to get there. And it was only through Girard that I was able to get there in the first place. I wasn't able to get there because I also got the conflict with sinners at the hands of an angry God. You know, that's part of the Puritan background here. That's part of what my background as a Congregationalist. We come from the Puritan and the Pilgrim background. So I got this Puritan strain, and where does this angry God come from? And what's all that about? And then you have this loving nature of Jesus, and where does that come from? And why this conflict? And why is this in such tension all the time? And then having problems within understanding within religion itself that the bureaucracy tends to favor power and not the Beatitudes, not the humbling nature, not all of the stuff that Jesus talks about in the Sermon on the Mount. So I'm trying to deal with the conflict in my own soul about how do you do the best you can and follow the best model, who I think is Jesus. How do you do that in a culture that absolutely has no interest in that, or has less interest in that than in competition? Because you can't say that has no interest, because the only reason why things are held together often is because of cooperation and care and love and generosity and all those good things. That's what binds a community together. The other stuff explodes it, but the binding is all done through, and religion means to be binding. So that's my response, but I don't know if that's at all helpful in terms of...
It is. So it gets to the heart of a lot of different things, which is that, especially the religion is binding. Religio was a word already used in the ancient times, but that binding referred to the binding of the sacrifice, or namely that sacrificial religion based on the scapegoat mechanism binds the community together, and allows peace to happen in the society. The Judeo scriptures that are culmination of thousands of years of experience of a minority group in the desert, surrounded by these Near Eastern religions that are sacrificial, just like every other religion in the world at the time. So the Jews are basically offshoots of these desert religions, and their gods are basically pagan gods to begin with, and their rituals are basically pagan religions to begin with. But slowly, this group has an experience that this binding force of religio, through violence, through an angry God, becomes to unravel in the stories being told, first orally and then written down in say the Babylonian period, or given what historical scriptural scholars explain how the Bible is put together. But it's generally this slow progression out of henotheism into monotheism, and it's basically what all cultures do in terms of they're assimilated. We're thrown into time. We're accustomed to the culture around us, but maybe there's a maturation process. There's some type of synthesis that can happen given our own reflection and inspiration to tell the truth. And I think it is really important that the experience of the Jews as this outsider group has a certain perspective on what is true. And so what begins to develop, Girard thinks that the main difference between the biblical tradition and the pagan tradition, or the primitive religions, is that if the pagans' myths are based on the scapegoat mechanism, it means that they can't. If the sacred is based on potentially a lie, namely that that the violence is justified, and that God's desire this sacrifice, this violence, then what the Bible what the Bible tells us is the same stories, but from the opposite perspective, from the perspective of the victim. And this is the singular insight that can collapse the sacred.
So,
all right, let me say it in a different way.
Well, so in the pagan religions, all of them, all of the religions have this issue of violence against the victim, but the victim is always guilty. What Girard discovers is in the Judeo-Christian paradigm, as it unfolds and continues to reveal itself up through Jesus, is that the victim is innocent.
That's a story told of basically why are all the religions the same? Because violence rises in a community and then has to be solved somehow.
Yes.
That's why religions are the same. That's why they're the same structure. A crisis develops, there's a collective murder, there's a divinity that then makes the cycle go round and round.
Yes.
That's why Christ is essentially put to death in the Gospels. There's a crisis, there's a collective murder, and a killing, and eventually even a resurrection. But the story is told from the perspective of the victim, and in this case, the victim, like you're saying, is innocent. The innocence of the victim, and therefore the relative innocence of all victims. Well, any victim that was killed in the scapegoating fashion has the potential to be innocent, and therefore the founding of your world, your worldview, your religion, whatever, is a lie, if in fact they're innocent. And so what Christianity does, or what all of the Judeo-Christian stories are doing, is criticizing the logic of primitive religion by inserting the question of the innocence of the one you're killing. Is it just the projection of the mob, the group, to find and to blame, and that need a scapegoat to find? If it is, then it's unjustified. And so what Christianity really poses is this question of, is this true? Is this godly? Is this good? And if you go a step further, that this is actually a revelation given to us by the incarnation of Jesus, who understands his own tradition, the biblical tradition that reveals this anti-sacrificial trend, and says that is actually the world we should be building, the kingdom of God. And Jesus accepts this role, and therefore knows he's going to be killed, and explains to the people who are going to kill him that they're going to kill him, given human nature, but also that they know not what they do. Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. Girard reads that as Jesus being literal. The scapegoat, to have a scapegoat means you don't know you have one, like Jamie said. Right. This is a really big insight. It means that even if there's no vantage point in which the truth of the scapegoating could be known to us by human beings, that it had to be an outside revelation, and even to go further, that revelation is telling us to love, first and foremost, that we need to forgive those who persecute us. And so what more of a divine image can you get of the revelation of the truth of the scapegoating mechanism accompanied with forgiveness? It's just the total opposite. It's the conversion that, Steve, you're talking about, when someone tells you, look, the whole world doesn't have to be competitive. There can be cooperation, there can be love. And that's what Christianity is. So even from an atheistic methodology that Girard is giving us, this isn't an assent to a doctrine. This is simply what the text is showing. And no one talked about Christianity this way. No one talked about it as a critique of the violent mechanisms of the world.
How does the continued violence throughout religion since Christianity's birth, however, how did Girard tackle that? Because to my mind, that, Christianity, the way that it's described and the way that I think he presents it is that revelation should have changed behaviors in the powers, perhaps, because now we've said, no, the victim was innocent. And, I grew up with these ideas that, they're good God-fearing people. This idea that God is still responsible for the violence when it was really man all along. It's what's kept us, a lot of us, away from organized religion. Still, I still grapple with that. Like, how is that not just manifest knowledge everywhere? Like, it is. We all acknowledge it. We say, on the other hand, Jesus died for our sins, and we acknowledge, all of the good teachings that he has brought, but yet, we continue in violence. And so going to positive mimesis, on the other hand, and toward the end with Rene, and toward the end of his life, and when he was looking at the world, what was his answer to that? Like, what, was he, he went to 94 or something, and I know a lot of these folks that you have in your film interviewed him there in those last years. What was his answer to the continued, negative mimesis going on, creating so much violence, so many more wars? He must have seen it pretty clearly in 2015 and, in the years before his death, that this was not, it was not changing yet.
Yeah, I think he blames Christianity in a sense, because he thinks that Jesus, by revealing the innocence of the victim and revealing the scapegoat mechanism, it brings about more conflict rather than less. Because if violence is somehow contained in ritual and in sacrifice, by dispelling of religion, so in a way Christianity is an anti-religion religion, because if religion is founded on scapegoating, then there just has to be another way. So by dismantling religion in that sense, in the primitive sense, and proclaiming the kingdom of God, Jesus is giving a wager between the kingdom of God, where there's a unanimous, that everyone, like Steve says, that every knee shall bend and every tongue confess Jesus Christ is Lord, that there is no reprisal of violence, there's a renunciation of violence par excellence, and peace on earth, or the apocalypse. So Jesus says that I've come to bring not peace, but a sword. And so he says, don't think I've come to bring peace. I've not come to bring peace, I've come to bring the sword. So it is an apocalyptic wager that the existential element to human societies, to human beings, is always there. So it's either we either assent to renouncing violence, or we continue and it is our own destruction. In a way, Girard sees Christianity, or the announcement, the diffusion of Christianity into our cultures, as kind of like taking off the training wheels. It's a new evolution in human freedom, because we have the knowledge that this can lead to the end of the world, but we don't have the spiritual strength. We haven't, or that's probably not a good way to say it. We don't have the humility to accept the grace to then renounce violence. So that in some ways it explains why violence is still, or even increasing in our world. given that we don't have sacrificial mechanisms to stop it. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, sure it does, yeah.
Basically breaks apart the sacrificial mechanisms and therefore brings about the end of the world or the kingdom of God, but puts it in the responsibility of humans to choose.
But now, Rene says, you know, when he uses the word apocalypse, he does it in the strict sense of unveiling. It's not 100% sure that don't associate apocalypse with annihilation.
Not from God.
Not from God.
Yeah.
But it is an apocalyptic is an unveiling, so that you can see the mechanisms that are operative. When he says, "I bring not peace but a sword," he's not saying he's bringing a physical sword to murder and kill and so on. He's saying that everything that is being disclosed is going to now cause conflict because you don't have the mechanism that you've been using forever, which is the scapegoat mechanism, which diffuses the anxiety and the violence. It lets the steam out, and that the culture can then be at peace for a while. But he says, okay, I'm unveiling that this is how this works. I'm going to show you how this works in me. And now you make a determination, but it's going to cause conflict because everybody's so used to doing it this way, you're going to have to change and do it this way. You're going to have to think of how you live your life differently than before I came and disclosed this. And then you make the choice. You're going to go into the same mimetic rivalry stuff, or you're going to say, I'm going to love my enemy. I'm going to pray for those who persecute me. I'm going to make sure that whatever happens in the future, in my future, that those that I come in contact with, I'm going to do the best not to display a desire to be more like what we've been in the past. It's a real opening up for a new consciousness. And Jesus is really bringing a new consciousness in, the Christ consciousness. And it's supposed to be global and universal. And it is not about a religion. It's not about Christianity. Christianity is just another form of pagan religion if you don't have a nonviolent atonement theory. And Jesus it's a nonviolent atonement theory. You don't come and squash all the people that just killed you, rather than you forgive them. And so that has all been disclosed thanks to Rene Girard, from my perspective. And now Walter Wink picks up on this and he says, the powers are good, the powers have fallen, the powers have to be redeemed. And so he also goes through, creation is good. In the beginning, God created and it was good. That the whole thing, the whole creation is good, but it's fallen. We have chosen wrongly to live the way that we live. And so that needs to be redeemed. So what we're working on here is the hope of redemption, not just for ourselves, but for the whole culture. And that's, I think, what we're looking at. That's the reason why I'm interested in Girard and in continuing your documentary work, because this is a disclosure of the apocalypse. And it's not defined as this is the direction. It doesn't have to be annihilation. It can be something else. But that's on us, it's not on God, right?
Yeah.
The unveiling, so to speak, for more and more of humanity, a revelation of more and more people,
More and more people have to come into this understanding, because without it, as Rene says, one match can set the whole world on fire. That's where we are right now. So we better, right now, do the best we can wherever we are with whomever we meet, because this is a critical moment in human history. Either we survive because we have chosen positive mimesis, the good model, which is the Jesus model, or we choose negative mimesis, which is antithetical, which is basically the fallen. I see Satan fall like lightning. Satan falls like lightning, Rene says in this book, and he falls like lightning because he's been kicked out of the highest domain, and now he's free to wander the earth to do whatever hell he wants, which is to cause disruption, to tempt us to be disruptive, to hurt each other and so on. So, but it's not in the heavenly realm from perspective of Girard. He's been kicked out. I see Satan, Jesus says, I see Satan fall like lightning. And Girard picks up on that and says, this is what this means. It means that we're going to have some problems to deal with right here on earth unless we become less mimetic, with negative mimesis, and choose to have positive mimesis.
This might be a provocative question, but who among, beyond Girard scholars, are promoting, the end of the violent nature of most of our global leaders? Honestly, I see evil creeping in more and more in my observations of our geopolitics and in life, and the fall of these leaders. It's not their fall. The truth of these leaders, so many leaders have gone the opposite direction in ways that are abhorrent and terrible.
Well, see, I would point back and say one of my heroes is Richard Wurmbrand, who was tortured for Christ, and Richard Wurmbrand said there's not enough shovels in the world to cover the truth. And so Jesus is the truth. And so there's not enough shovels, not enough dirt that they can throw on this that's going to cover it and try to eliminate it or bulldoze it under.
Right.
Because the truth makes you free. Says you will know the truth, and truth shall set you free. So you live as free people only when you know that it is actually through a good, positive, caring for the other that the world is changed. And everyone can do that, and they do it in their own humble and simple way wherever they go all the time. That's what's kept us going for so long already. It's how do you reach the power structures, and how do those people involved with maintaining power, how do you break through to them so that they have a different understanding of what, because look at the people down here on our level, we're not interested in having war. We're not interested in killing our neighbors. For the most part, we're interested in helping each other and to doing the best we can. We're not into that other stuff. That's other people working on this level.
Right.
I don't know. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, it poses like the dire question of our time, and Girard saw this pretty presciently, is that unless everyone turns away from violence, that the asymmetry of power, the asymmetry of violence itself, will swallow up everyone.
Yes, that's right.
So Girard, in his last book, Battling to the End, this is why he's pessimistic, is that the powers that be, they're the only ones that need not follow the kingdom of God to destroy the world. The mechanisms are already in place. The nuclear stockpiles are already built. They're already there. They already exist. And that means the plebeians like us can only run the race. I don't know. It's a very hard question. Maybe it has to do with something like, for me, yeah, I've thought about this stuff for a long time. I spent, 4 years on this part of the doc while many different things were happening in the world, like COVID, like all our political upheavals. We're on the brink of World War III, of whatever it is. And I kind of had to put that out of my mind and to look down at my keyboard and put the task at hand of getting this message out. And so whatever it is that your vocation is, whatever domain and sphere that you can affect with this message, namely the gospel, you have to do it.
Yeah, that's
and see, it makes religion relevant.
Yeah.
And it brings forth hope and peace and joy all those things that we want to have. But it has to begin with God is not violent. You can't get there with a violent God. You can't do it. You just can't do it. You can't have this bifurcation between God's angry sometimes, God's not angry other times.
Yeah, because then you'll think you're on the side of God all the time, meaning like whatever you do, you're justified in doing it. Whatever target, whatever enemy that you think is causing the ills of the world, you'll already feel like you're on the right side. And therefore, if God is violent, he'll punish them in the end or whatever it is. And I think it also relates to that it's okay to die. Like, it's okay to be killed. And many people who have stood up to, in the name of nonviolence, are dead. And many Christians in the history of our church, like the seeds of the church are the martyrs and saints. And so it seems that the individual call is to be joyful in your life, to be fruitful, multiply, to enjoy your family, to help those around you, to serve the least fortunate. And then if violence knocks at your door, you're already ready.
What would you like the takeaway for this session? What's most important for you, Sam, with how we wrap this up?
No, I think I hope my film is seen by a lot of people. That's one reason we're putting it on YouTube for free. There's no barrier to entry, and it can be shared, and it can form a lot of really interesting conversations around the dinner table, and that it kind of expresses that the message of the gospel is ever ancient, ever new.
Are there any persons that you interviewed that you would like to speak about? Did any people help and bring something out to you? You mentioned the professor up in Buffalo, who I think was wonderful. That's a great interview that you did with him. Bandera. But anybody else that you talk about right now individually about this one or that one?
Yeah, I think what comes to mind is Sandy Goodhart. He had something profound that I held with me this whole time, which is that, and he's a scholar of English literature, but he's also Jewish. And in the film, we mentioned that it was Sandy's friendship with Girard that brought him back to his Jewish faith. But he talks about like the Shabbat, the Sabbath, if the point of Judaism is to get nearness to God, then there's always this moment where we're straying farther away from God. And the Shabbat means to stop and to turn. So to take a Sabbath means to stop what you're doing, stop your straying away, and to turn and to not do. So in a way, not doing is a way in which it's sometimes more important to the spiritual life than doing anything, because so often we're tempted to, when we attempt to do something, it's to try to solve the problem in some big way, or to start a project, or to start an organization, to go after these big questions, and also or to retaliate, that this person did this to me, there's someone wrong on the internet, so I have to correct them. But it's the not doing, the stopping, and being nearer to God that I think is the point. Otherwise we get into idolatry, where whatever our focus is that's not God can keep us isolated and keep us in a spiral, and often violently.
So Shabbat, and then you move into Shalom, right? So they say the greeting is Shabbat Shalom. So stop, get some peace, right?
Yeah.
But we have
real peace. So not the peace offered by the scapegoat mechanism, not the peace that is created by a group who is, talking gossip about someone else, or about the peace that comes in your political party to the other party. That's peace of the world. But Christ, who is the Prince of Peace, is a peace that's beyond all human understanding.
Yeah, and he begins talking, and John the Baptizer before him, about repenting and then that has to do with a metanoia, a conversion. So it's a new mind. So you change your old mind into a new mind. Repent, for the kingdom of God is near, right? So Sandy helped you with the stopping. Who else in your film do you anybody that you mentioned mentioned that you interviewed that jumps out at you?
I guess I was just struck by all of them, that they all had their own unique relationship with Rene, that in fact Rene did change people's lives personally, especially with these people, and that in fact they spent the rest of their careers in doing some hard work, some scholarly work, making the theory more available. And so I think I owe all of the people who appear in the film, as well as all the other Girardian scholars and community, this huge debt that it's like the good work. Like there's good work being done, a lot of good questions being asked, a lot of great criticism happening, and I think it's a very special moment for people interested in Girard, because Girard even says that either my ideas will become common sense or not at all. They won't be known at all. But I think the trend is going into the direction that they'll just be common sense. It won't be this big grand theory of everything. We'll just hopefully already understand that the Christian inheritance is indispensable to our way of life, our futures, and that maybe we're already in, like, we think that by converting, like you're saying, to a nonviolent and God-centered life, we'd have to give up our individuality and our freedom. And I think Girard gives us the lexicon and the theory to look at our own lives and ask, are we truly free otherwise? And I hope that becomes common sense, that people will be able to look at their own desires, their own inventory of their own desires, their past decisions, and to ask, are they as free as they can be?
Great. Sam, thank you so much for this time and for going through the movie and all of these ideas. And we're looking forward to launch on Christmas Day, ideally. Is that right? And where do people find it? How do we get to do it?
It'll be on the YouTube channel, which is Things Hidden: The Life and Legacy of Rene Girard, and also thingshidden.movie.
Thingshidden.movie? Okay.
Excellent.
And that'll be up there on that day, December.
That's correct.
On what would have been his 101st birthday, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time and for all of this, and really looking forward to seeing the movie and seeing more people be able to view it and to learn all about it. So thank you.